Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of NU Takes. My name is Michael Barthelemy.
And I'm Didi Jin, and we're here to give our own hot takes and spicy opinions about all things Northwestern sports. This week, we're joined by one of our co-editors in chief, Max Stone, to preview Northwestern's defense for 2021.
Hey guys, thanks for having me.
Thanks to Mac for coming on and to discuss the defense. The defense was one of the best in the country last year for Northwestern and propelled them to a Big Ten West title and a Citrus Bowl win.
One of the big strengths from that group was the abundance of veteran leadership. 7 of the 11 starters in 2020 were seniors, including the linebacking trio of Fisher, Gallagher, and Bergen, otherwise known as the law firm. Northwestern projects to bring back only 4 2020 starters and has a new defensive coordinator in Jim O'Neill. With this, I'll start with Mac. What's your biggest worry about the mass turnover in personnel?
Well, I'll start with this. I think my biggest worry, like you said, is losing that veteran presence on all 3 levels. You look at the secondary; they're losing guys like J.R. Pace. Greg Newsome went first round in the draft this year, so you lose those 2. And then on the line, in terms of linebackers, you lose guys like Patty Fisher, Blake Gallagher. Both of them are gone. And then even on the defensive, the defensive line, Ernest Brown was drafted by the Rams this year. He's a huge veteran presence that's now gone as well. And then, even with this isn't, my main concern, but when you look at Jim O'Neill's track record in the NFL, it's not, to say that it is not super impressive, to say the least. I don't have the exact statistics in front of me. But he did not have an amazing tenure with the Raiders and the 49ers and teams like that. So overall, I'm cautiously optimistic, but the loss of a veteran presence is definitely one of the main things I'm worried about.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm not really worried about personnel because I agree with Mac where I think continuously we've seen Northwestern with a strong defensive unit. It's been a mainstay in Evanston for like about a decade. It was just Northwestern's going to have a pretty good defense. And sure, they pop up every once in a while and have one of the best defenses in the nation, but their defense is never like atrociously bad. And so I'm not really worried about that, even with O'Neill coming in, because I do think defense like Mike Hankwitz for the past however many years he was coaching, I think his presence and his veteran, like he's really seen it all. I think that made a big difference for Northwestern and their ability to have consistent success. I don't know if I really am worried, honestly, because I think that this defense will still be solid. I think it's just a matter of will it be amazing to carry the team, which I don't think it'll be able to do. But as Mac mentioned with Jim O'Neill, that's probably the biggest concern I have because you're bringing in a new guy, a new coach, and you're right, in his tenure in the NFL, it wasn't very good. His defenses, where he was the defensive coordinator for the Browns and then in the 49ers, they ranked worst, third to worst, and worst in rushing yards allowed. All that turnover and linebacking core as well. You just there's a lot of concerns for that rush defense. And if they're going to be able to stop running backs and contain quarterbacks with Jim O'Neill not seeming to have figured out how to coach around that.
To be honest, I'm pretty worried about this defense. I think that, like you said, Michael, the defense has been good in Evanston, for around the last 10 years, even when guys leave, potentially for the NFL, there always seems to be someone to fill their place. But I just think that, Northwestern relies too much on a bend, don't break system. And if we look at last year, obviously, it's a great year, but I think that, if that defense is slightly worse, right, if there's no Greg Newsome, 1 or 2 of the Northwestern's the close wins could easily have been losses. We remember in the beginning of the year, Northwestern just did not give up touchdowns in the second half, I think until the Purdue game. And then even after that, Wisconsin, they didn't give up a score in the second, third, or fourth quarter. And to me, the biggest worry, Jim, you guys, I think, you mentioned it, Jim O'Neill. I'm nervous to see, how his transition to college football is going to be. I don't think it's going to be seamless. I think that Northwestern is going to be prone to give up more big plays. And I think a big part of that is the loss of Greg Newsome. Obviously, he was a first-round draft pick. He's going to be a big loss. But I think that when people talk about the losses, people are talking about, Peyton Ramsey, offensive leaders. But I think that Greg Newsome's loss has the biggest impact on the team, on offense or defense. He was like a shutdown corner. You could leave him on an island. You could leave him on an island, and you didn't have to worry about him. You didn't have to worry about giving them safety help or any of that. And that's going to be a luxury that I don't think Northwestern is going to have. Whoever their number one corner is, whether that's AJ Hampton, Cam Mitchell. I think they're great players, but Greg Newsome was, again, for first round NFL talent. And I think his loss is going to be what causes the defense to potentially be mediocre this year. And I think that's not a recipe for success.
You would say the defense is going to be mediocre?
I think in the Big Ten, within the Big Ten, I think it's going to be mediocre in terms of advanced statistics, S&P. I think that it's, going to finish maybe in the around like 5th or 6th. Yeah. I mean, the Big Ten's a talented conference. I'm not trying to discredit Northwestern's defense. The personnel, obviously, we've seen what Brandon Joseph can do. We've seen what other guys can do. But, it's just with all that turnover, with the new coach who hasn't had college experience, and without that shutdown corner that you had last year, I'm not particularly confident.
With all that turnover, there is bound to be a learning curve. So which position group, Didi, do you think will have the hardest time adjusting?
I think it's going to be the linebacker core. I think that obviously Chris Bergen is a great player. He's got a great story. And I think it's essential that we have him. I think if he didn't come back this year, that the defense would be worse than mediocre. But even beyond that, I think that playing linebacker is, again, I don't have any personal experience, but it seems to me like it comes with a lot of in-game reps. You learn things, you learn, the speed of the game to pick up into the quarterback eyes. I think it's a lot different than practice. And I think the guys that are in that room are talented. But I think that the linebackers are responsible for so much, whether that's run defense or pass defense. And I think just with, 2 new starters, even though, with guys like Peter McIntyre, it seems like, Fitz is confident. I think that there's bound to be a few mistakes and, a 3rd and 8 conversion that might not have happened last year with like Patty Fisher and Blake Gallagher, I think could happen. And, that just that in and of itself, one score, one field goal, one touchdown, that could be, with how good, like with how unstable the offense is potentially, that could be enough to take the Cats down.
Mm-hmm. And Mac, do you see the same concerns with the linebacking core?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I'm also going to go with the linebackers here. As we've already mentioned, the Cats are losing Patty Fisher and Blake Gallagher. They were their first and second leading tacklers in 2020. Obviously, Chris Bergen comes back. He was their 3rd leading tackler in 2020. But after that, it's sort of, it's a question mark. There aren't a lot of guys who have seen the field a ton or have a ton of experience. Didi brought up Peter McIntyre. I believe he had something like 6 tackles in all of 2020, whereas Bergen, Fisher, and Gallagher were all above or were close to or above 80 tackles. The linebackers really relied on those 3 guys last year and in years prior. And so, when you lose those 2 just huge, I mean, they just produced a ton for the defense in 2020. And when you lose that amount of production, there's bound to be some problems that arise. So I think definitely the biggest learning curve will be with the linebackers.
Another question I would pose would be, where do you think relative to expectations we're gonna see the biggest difference from Mike Hankwitz to Jim O'Neill? I'll shoot that to Didi first.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great question. I think that in terms of, strictly, I guess, the positional talent, I think that, Northwestern is lucky to have, I think, a lot of great positional coaches on the defensive side of the ball. Tim McGarrigle being one of them, obviously. Who's been there since 2018, coach of the linebackers. I just think that it's going to be overall scheme and just being able to read that defense. I think that Mike Hankwitz had, it seemed like he kind of had an uncanny ability to know what certain quarterbacks' weaknesses were, certain quarterback strengths, what other teams were going to call, and kind of planning around that. And I think that for Jim O'Neill, not only is it going to be adjusting I think adjusting to college level is going to be a challenge, especially a team like Northwestern where there is so much turnover on the defensive side of the ball. I just think it's the big overall scheme that we see, and little mistakes here and there that we might not have seen last year. With that veteran presence in with that longtime defensive coordinator.
Yeah, I'm going to sort of piggyback off of Didi's answer. Obviously, with O'Neill not having any college experience, there's bound to be there's going to be some adjustments he needs to make. But in terms of where people need to sort of limit their expectations, I don't mean to keep, harping on the linebackers, but so I'll say the entire front seven. We saw last year in the Big Ten Championship, Trey Sermon ran for 330 yards against the Cats. They could not stop him. They could not, he's an NFL running back now, but they could not stop Trey Sermon. And with Jim O'Neill's track record in the NFL when it comes to rush defense and how just poorly his teams have performed under him against the run, excuse me, I think there's going to be a lot of the front seven is going to struggle to contain the run a lot. I'm not as concerned about pass defense as I am run defense, but people should really limit their expectations when it comes to defending the run.
So we're switching gears to go from what side of what positional group are you sort of least confident in opening week to most confident in? There's a lot of veterans or guys with experience in the defensive backfield and on the defensive line. So which are you more confident in week one?
I would go with, I'm still going to, again, contrary to my last answer, I'm going to say the secondary. When we look back at the Big Ten Championship, Greg Newsome was injured. There were a lot of question marks about who would step up to replace him. And it was sort of a team effort. We saw Cam Mitchell get some action. He did great. AJ Hampson obviously played very well. Rod Hurd played well as well. I don't think, we're losing the veteran presence in J.R. Pace. But of course, the first team All-American Brandon Joseph is back there as well. You can't forget about that. His presence alone is really one of the main factors in putting the secondary or making the secondary as strong as it is. I think we'll see Hampton, Mitchell, and Rod Hurd step up this year. They kind of have to with Newsome gone. There's a huge shoes to fill, but the secondary is definitely going to be the strongest position group heading into 2021.
Didi, do you see it the same way?
To be honest, not to keep on, raining down all this pessimism, but there's no defensive, group that, I see standing out above the rest. I'm not to say that they're all terrible, but I just think that, while I do, agree with some of what Max saying about the secondary, that kind of experience, obviously Brandon Joseph, what we saw Cam Mitchell last year and AJ Hampton too, we're good, but we're great things. But we also saw, players like AJ Hampton, make mistakes here and there, which is, what happens on like most starters on Big Ten teams and most teams in the country. And I think that, especially with that second, starting safety spot being a potential question, I just, I don't know how good the secondary is going to necessarily be. I think that there's just no one group that stands out above the rest.
Mm-hmm. I agree with Mac that the defensive backs I think will step up and be good because fans saw AJ Hampton, Rod Hurd, and Cam Mitchell all step up at meaningful times and make big plays. They had opportunities to play on a consistent basis, and now they'll start. And I think they will be able to not be serviceable starters, or a few of them will be able to step up and be more than a serviceable starter. In particular, AJ Hampton, I think he has potential to be really, really good. But I will shoot it over to the defensive line just to touch on them and, decipher a little bit. Joe Spivak's coming back. Tomi Adebayor is coming back. And Sam Duke Miller, don't forget about him because he opted out of 2020, but in 2019, he was a starter in a pretty good one in his time starting. And now he's going to be graduate starter. And then also Jeffrey Pooler is going to be there. And he was a rotational piece for West Virginia, but West Virginia is a talented program and he was able to make plays for them at times. And I think that he can come in and be a pretty good presence. And as a backup, he'll be able to come in and just make some impact plays. And also like Trevor Kemp, we saw him for the past couple of years getting pretty consistent reps. He had injuries last year, but when he's on the field, he's pretty solid. And I think that the defensive line, with all the names that they're bringing back and all the reps that everyone on this defensive line has, I think that they do have potential to be able to, I don't know if they'll be a ferocious, line that's able to get to the quarterback consistently in every play. They're pressuring and bringing them down for a sack, but they'll be able to contain the quarterback and hold off the run, because while O'Neal doesn't have the track record to be a great defensive, like a front seven coach to stop the run, I think that can change with positional coaches and with Pat Fitzgerald. And I think that fits perfectly with the leadership that, I mean, they have the ultimate Wildcat and Joe Spivak at defensive tackle. So I think that will be able to shore some things up. And I think that the defensive line will step up and be a very solid group for the Cats this year.
Do you see it being better or worse than the defensive line was last year?
I think that defensive line will be better than last year. I think Adebayor, I mean, Dan Olinger loves him, one of our co-editors in chief. And I think that he's got a good point in loving him, because I think that he can fill in Ernest Brown's leaving, which stinks, but Adebayor will be able to step in and be a similar contributor, if not better in my eyes. And Sam Duke Miller was pretty good in his time starting, and he'll be able to slide in as the other defensive end. So Northwestern isn't coming in with a new starter who's had minimal snaps, which is unique to the other defensive groups. And I think that because of that, their just knowledge of the game, that the defensive line will be able to be very solid and will be able to make plays.
So a big part of, again, this new defense is the opportunity for young and inexperienced players to break out into potential stardom. The Northwestern faithful saw that last year with Brandon Joseph, going from a largely unknown prospect, many didn't even have him as a starter, to a first-team All-American. Who is one player that you could see bursting out onto the scene for the Cats this season? Mac, I'll start with you.
Yeah, I mean, I know I've talked a lot about the secondary. I've praised the secondary a lot, and I'm going to stay in the secondary. I'm going to go with AJ Hampton. I know, it could be Cam Mitchell as well, but it looks like Hampton is the most likely person to step into Greg Newsome's role this year as that first string corner. They need a lockdown guy. He's going to be lining up against the top Big Ten receivers week after week. It's going to be a big role for him, and mainly I choose him solely because of production. He's going to will likely be targeted a lot, at least in the early weeks. The Michigan State game could be a huge make or break game for him. And if he doesn't perform up to standard week one, who maybe Cam Mitchell steps into that role. And if we see him shine, it could be one of them. I don't expect like a first team All-American performance or even like a third team All-American performance. I don't think that's what we're going to get out of anyone on the defense this year per se. I know that's sort of a pessimistic viewpoint, but I think it's just the way things are going to go. But I think if Hampton can step in, or Mitchell, if one of them can step into Greg Newsome's role and do the job, I think there's somebody, or one of them is going to break out and be a star for this defense.
Mm-hmm. I'll keep it in the secondary, and I'll say Coco Azema. I know that Northwestern, we saw safety emerge last year with Brandon Joseph and hit the highest of highs. And I don't think Azema is going to be able to be a first-team All-American. I think that's just unrealistic to stick on any new starter or anyone in general. But I think in the production that we've seen from Coco Azema, sure, most of it hasn't been at safety. I mean, fans will remember when Coco Azema went off for 123 rushing yards off of 7 carries against Illinois at running back. So that's most of what people have seen of Azema, but I think that Coco Azema being a fast player, great instincts, great eye for the ball, I think that he'll be able to come and be a contributor at safety. And with J.R. Pace leaving, those are big shoes to fill, because J.R. Pace was solid in that Northwestern secondary for years, and now he is on the Atlanta Falcons. But now I think Azema will be able to step into the role and be more than a serviceable starter. I think he'll be able to be one of the better players on this defense and create a dynamic safety duo in Brandon Joseph and Coco Azema. It'll create the foundation for Northwestern to continue that pipeline of great defensive talent.
I see where you guys are coming from, but I think that your judgment might be clouded by, obviously the emergence of Brandon Joseph last year. And not to keep on harping on the secondary, I think there's going to be a solid group, But while I think that someone like AJ Mitchell is going to be a good player for the defense this year, I just don't see him stepping into the role that Greg Newsome did. I mean, Greg Newsome really emerged as elite in his third year at Northwestern, and AJ Mitchell. I mean, I hope he proves me wrong, but I just don't know if we're going to see that big of a jump or in terms of his production. And then in terms of Coco Azema, I think Azema, some people thought that he would earn the starting role of the safety spot across from Jared Pace last year. It ended up being Brandon Joseph. He did see the field a good amount last year. You had the interception against Maryland, but outside of that, didn't really get a lot of game time action. I think he could be a solid starter this year, but to say that he's going to break out, I don't think that either of those players are the likeliest to break out. To me, I think the clear choice is Peter McIntyre. I think he's going to be thrust into a starting role where he's playing a lot of downs, and I think that just his overall experience and just hearing what Fitz has said about him, how Fitz talked about him at the Big Ten media days. He's really given it up, saying that he probably could have gone somewhere else, been a starter at another solid program. But the fact that he stayed, he's going into his senior season now. I think that he's gonna be playing with a chip on his shoulder. I think a lot of guys are gonna be playing with a chip on his shoulder. But I just see McIntyre. I think he's got the right situation for it. I think that he's got the right positional coach for it, and it seems like he's got the requisite skill set to emerge as not maybe a first team All American, but someone who could earn all big honors, whether that's first, second, or third team.
Do you think that, I mean, to backtrack a little bit, when you're dissing the Coco Azema and AJ Hampton picks, do you think that that's maybe we're picking some secondary players because that's what's been Northwestern's strength the past couple of years? Last year, I mean, there was the Sky Team. We've seen the Sky Team emerge before. Do you think that's, I mean, Jim O'Neill, that's his strength. I don't know if it's that clouded of
I don't know if
judgment.
it's a strength.
The numbers.
I don't know if it's a strength. It's what he's known for. But I mean, like we were saying, Jim O'Neill does not have the greatest track record in the NFL. I love the Sky Team. I do. I love the Sky Team. I think they're going to be a solid group this year. I think they're going to be, a good group within the Big Ten. But it's just, losing Greg Newsome. I think like Greg Newsome is a not one in a kind of talent. I think he was really just left on an island a lot of the time last year, and he just never gave up big plays, or touchdowns, and that was huge for Northwestern. And I just don't think that's a realistic expectation to have for someone like AJ Hampton, or Cam Mitchell, or Coco Azema. I think that the ceiling is potentially their ceiling is sky high, but just to get to that level, just after what we saw last year, which was they played at like a decent level, I don't think it's very realistic.
Well, I don't know if we're asking them to be Greg Newsome, just because Greg Newsome, as you mentioned, is like once in a generation type of talent for Northwestern. But AJ Hampton, Rod Hurd, and Cam Mitchell are all just very solid in my eyes. They're all like, if we're gonna put this in video game terms, they're all like 80 overall, and have 380 overall. That's pretty decent in my book. And I think we saw issues with Cam Ruiz last year giving up the big play. I think that Hampton, Hurd, and Mitchell will become very solid, and they're all have like grown into with each other in this program, and I think that they'll be able to step up especially because of the environment that they're in at Northwestern, where it's really just like work your tail off and good things will come.
Yeah, I'm gonna agree with that. I think that they're gonna be good, but I just think if we're talking about a breakout player, like someone who's gonna, potentially get, I don't know who's gonna potentially get national coverage, I'm all in on Peter McIntyre. I just think he's just in the right position to come out and be great.
Didi, I'm curious. Do you think the lack of experience for McIntyre, does that worry you at all?
I mean, it's worrying. Yeah, obviously, it'd be hypocritical of me to be harping on the corners and the safeties, lack of experience, and not touch on McIntyre's. But I just think that Northwestern is, their linebackers have been so good for so long. that McIntyre's had the chance to learn for 4 years now. This is going to be his 5th year on campus. And he's slowly getting seeing more and more game action. And that just makes me think that, he's cut out for this. I'm sure that, again, like everyone else, we might see some little mistakes here and there, but I think he could be, almost like a Brandon Joseph type of breakout where it was just a lot of highs throughout the year and not a lot of lows. So again, yeah, his experience is slightly worrying, but I mean, we all remember Brandon Joseph last year had not started before and emerged as now, one of the best defensive players in the Big Ten, if not the country.
All right. Well, that does it for the defensive preview for Northwestern football. We'll see how the Cats perform Friday, September 3rd against Michigan State. So from NU Takes, I'm Michael Barthelemy.
And I'm Didi Jin.
Thanks again to Max Stone for coming on. We really
Thanks for
appreciate
having me.
it.
Yeah, it was awesome.
All right. We'll see you all next week.